Welcome the Lord's chosen. There comes a moment in every chosen one's life when the table doesn't just turn. It flips itself, folds the legs, and walks out of the room. And if you're watching this, that moment has finally reached you. Because whether you realized it or not, you've spent years being the emotional ATM, the spiritual generator, the human charger people plugged into whenever their own batteries ran dead. Some of them weren't even subtle. They came with the confidence of someone walking into their father's house. Meanwhile, you were paying the bills, fixing the leaks, and somehow still apologizing for the noise. But here's the real shocker. Psychology studies show that people with empathetic, intuitive, service-oriented personalities are statistically the most targeted by manipulators and energy leeches. Not because you're weak, but because you're wired to give before you guard. It's like you came with an open sign built into your aura, and users treated it like a 24/7 convenience store. And while everyone else gets closed for maintenance, you somehow stayed open through emotional hurricanes, spiritual earthquakes, and the kind of disrespect that should have required a federal permit. But something shifted, not just in your mind, in your entire frequency. You didn't speak up, yet people suddenly became uncomfortable. You didn't confront anyone, yet certain folks started avoiding you like you were handing out accountability notices. You didn't change your routine, but the atmosphere around you changed its opinion. What they didn't know is that you were not shutting down, you were upgrading. And every system upgrade comes with one brutal feature: no more unauthorized users. See, the chosen ones reach a stage where being used isn't even possible anymore, not because people stop trying, but because you stop participating. You stop offering discounts on your presence. You stop allowing people to make withdrawals from accounts they never contributed to. You stop carrying people who are committed to going nowhere. And yes, the transformation is powerful, but let's be honest, it's also very funny. Because the moment you stop being available, the same people who once said you're doing too much suddenly realize you were doing everything. And watching them try to function without your energy is like watching someone try to charge their phone with a broken cable. They keep adjusting, twisting, blowing on it, praying over it, still nothing. That's when they panic. That's when the truth hits. That's when they realize the one thing you've known all along. A chosen one may be generous, but they are not replaceable. And today, we're going to talk about why you're finally done being used, and why this season of your life is about to shift everything you thought you'd lost into everything you were always meant to gain. Stay right here. We're just getting started. Number one, you weren't being used. You were being measured. People often assume you were being taken advantage of because you were too kind, too patient, or too forgiving. But the truth runs much deeper. Many of the people who kept coming to you, pulling from you or leaning on you, weren't just using you. They were studying you. They were watching how far your compassion stretched, how quickly you responded to their needs, how much of yourself you were willing to give before you finally drew a line. They were measuring the limits of your tolerance, not because they deserved your efforts, but because they were trying to see how much they could get away with. It's uncomfortable to admit, but there's a pattern with people who don't know how to build themselves. They never test your love. They test your boundaries. And the more you showed up, the more they adjusted their behavior, not out of gratitude, but out of opportunity. They were taking mental notes. How much can I take before they say something? How many times will they forgive me? How little can I give and still stay in their life? In their minds, your kindness wasn't a blessing. It was a loophole. But what they didn't expect was the shift happening inside you. Their measurements had an expiration date. Every time you helped, every time you sacrificed, every time you went above and beyond, you were learning something too. Not about them, but about yourself. You were discovering what drained you, what disrespected you, and what no longer felt aligned with who you were becoming. And eventually, the scales balanced. The same generosity they treated as weakness became the very strength that made you walk away. They thought they were calculating your limits, but you were calculating your worth. They thought they were in control, but you were awakening. And when that awakening hit, every measurement they took became useless, because you were no longer operating at the level they once accessed so easily. You weren't being used. You were being evaluated. And now that you finally know your value, those old measurements don't fit you anymore. You've outgrown every version of yourself that allowed that treatment. Number 2, they didn't take advantage of you. They took notes on your blind spots. People didn't just walk into your life and start using you out of nowhere. They studied you first. They observed the places where you hesitated to say no, where you brushed things off to avoid conflict, where you gave more than you received because that felt natural to you. They watched how you handled disappointment, how you forgave quickly, and how you explained away behavior that should have never been acceptable. They paid attention to the cracks in your boundaries long before you ever noticed them yourself. And the truth is, they didn't take from you because you had nothing better to do. They took from you because you didn't protect the parts of yourself that needed guarding. The softest parts of you were exposed, your loyalty, your sympathy, your willingness to go the extra mile. To them, those weren't beautiful qualities. They were opportunities. They learned your patterns like a script. You'd help even when you were tired. You'd show up even when they didn't deserve it. And you'd stay quiet even when something clearly bothered you. Once they understood your blind spots, they started designing their behavior around them. They knew exactly how much guilt to trigger, how much praise to offer, and how to keep you engaged just enough. They didn't have emotional depth. They had emotional strategy, and it was all built on the places you weren't paying attention to within yourself. But here's the twist. Those blind spots didn't stay blind forever. Every time someone crossed a line you didn't know existed, you learned something new about who you needed to become. You learned where you needed to tighten your boundaries, where you needed to stop explaining yourself, and where you needed to stop showing up for people who only showed up when it benefited them. They thought your blind spots made you vulnerable. Instead, they became the blueprint for your growth. Because once you saw what they saw, you took back every power they took notes on. And now, those same blind spots they depended on are the very areas where they can no longer reach you. Number 3, every favor you gave was actually a loyalty test. They failed instantly. Every time you went out of your way for someone, it wasn't just a simple act of kindness. What you didn't realize was that people who are used to taking advantage of others don't see favors as generosity. They see them as tests. They want to know how much you'll tolerate, how much you'll bend, and how long it will take before you finally say enough. And most of the time they fail those tests immediately because their goal isn't to honor your effort. They're only checking if you can be manipulated, measured, and pushed into submission. When you gave, they assumed your compliance was permanent. They assumed your patience had no expiration date. They assumed loyalty meant being available on their schedule, never theirs. But every time they asked for more than what was reasonable, every time they expected gratitude for the bare minimum, every time they treated your generosity like a service they were owed, they revealed something crucial. They had no intention of passing the test. They weren't loyal. They were opportunists. The real irony is that your heart was too big to see it at first. You were ready to invest in people who didn't invest in themselves, who didn't value what they had in front of them. You thought giving meant building relationships. They thought taking meant winning. And because you didn't immediately recognize the difference, you ended up standing in the middle of a loyalty test you didn't even know was being graded, while they were failing spectacularly at every step. What made it even more powerful is that once you finally recognized it, you stopped playing by their rules. You realized loyalty isn't measured by how much you give to people who will never give back. It's measured by how much respect you command from those who deserve it. Every favor they tried to exploit became proof of their own failure, not your weakness. And the moment you stopped testing yourself against their expectations, they lost the game entirely. The chosen ones don't waste their energy on players who fail before the starting whistle. They move on, stronger, wiser, and untouchable, by those who only wanted a free pass. Number 4, you were the resource. They pretended they discovered, but never invested in. Many people will act like they've stumbled upon a rare treasure when they encounter someone truly valuable. But in reality, they only want what they can take, not what they can nurture. They see your energy, your skills, your time, or your presence, and treat it like something to exploit, not something to cultivate. They make it look like discovery, as if you're some rare gem they've earned the right to, when all along their intention was to enjoy the surface without ever going deeper. They wanted access to what you could offer, not the work it took to grow alongside you. Every meeting, every conversation, every act of support was an opportunity for them to extract value while contributing nothing in return. They never asked how they could add to your life, how they could match your energy, or how they could honor the trust you were giving them. To them, the benefit was immediate and tangible, while the bond, the real connection that requires effort and respect, was irrelevant. And this is the subtle trap many overlook. The fact that they pretend to discover you makes it feel like a gift, but it's a camouflage. While you were opening up, sharing, and giving, they were calculating how much they could take without ever paying attention to your growth or well-being. They didn't invest because investment requires risk, patience, and commitment. 3 things they refused to offer. They only wanted to skim the surface and enjoy what they could, leaving the deeper layers of your value untouched and unappreciated. The moment you see this clearly, the dynamic shifts completely. You realize you were never just being generous. You were providing a test of intent. They revealed their true colors by never contributing, never caring, and never respecting the resource they claimed to have discovered. Once you stop being a resource for people who refuse to invest, you reclaim your power. The chosen ones don't stay available for those who only want temporary gain. You move forward, fully aware that genuine growth and connection demand reciprocity, and anyone unwilling to give that is no longer part of your journey. Number 5, you weren't the backup plan. You were the plan they never intended to respect. The harsh truth is that people often treat the most valuable among us as if we're optional, like a safety net they hope to never need. But you weren't a backup. You weren't a placeholder while they searched for someone better or more convenient. You were the plan, the presence, the contribution they should have honored from the beginning. The reason they failed to treat you properly wasn't because they didn't recognize your worth. It's because they did. They knew exactly what they had in front of them, and that awareness made them careless, dismissive, or manipulative. They saw your strength, your loyalty, and your potential. But instead of nurturing it, they minimized it, overlooked it, or tried to control it. They acted as if your presence was negotiable, as if your time and energy were unlimited resources to be tapped whenever convenient. But the reality is that your value was never in question. You were irreplaceable. Their inability to respect you wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their own lack of integrity, courage, and maturity. By failing to honor you, they exposed their true priorities. They weren't interested in partnership, alignment, or mutual growth. They were interested in convenience, advantage, and self-serving gain. Every slight, every moment of dismissal, and every attempt to take your effort for granted was proof that they were never equipped to handle the power and presence you carried. And that's why walking away, stepping back, or setting boundaries isn't punishment. It's revelation. You weren't leaving because they failed you. You were leaving because they revealed themselves as incapable of giving the respect your presence demanded. The chosen ones understand that being treated as optional is never acceptable because their time, energy, and loyalty are priceless. You weren't the backup, and now that you know their true intentions, you can move forward unapologetically, leaving those who never respected the plan behind. Number 6, your energy became their currency because they're spiritually bankrupt. There are people who walk through life with empty inner worlds, no self-awareness, no emotional maturity, no sense of responsibility for their own healing. They avoid growth the way others avoid danger, and because they refuse to build themselves, they end up depending on the strength of those who have actually done the work. That's where you came in. You weren't just a friend, a partner, or a confidant to them. You were the power source they plugged into whenever their own spirit collapsed under the weight of their unaddressed issues. They didn't know how to self-regulate, so they used your calm. They didn't know how to encourage themselves, so they used your motivation. They didn't know how to confront their own darkness, so they used your light to avoid dealing with it. You became the emotional generator they depended on, the place they returned to when life humbled them, the shoulder they leaned on when their own decisions caught up with them. But the relationship was never equal. They weren't showing up for you, they were showing up to refill themselves. They weren't sharing space, they were siphoning energy. People who are spiritually bankrupt don't just drain you, they attach themselves to you. They survive by taking what you worked hard to cultivate within yourself. And the more you gave, the more they leaned. The more you supported, the less they tried. They weren't interested in leveling up. They were interested in staying exactly the same while benefiting from your growth. The reason you felt tired, heavy, or emotionally cluttered around them is because you were carrying the responsibility they refused to carry for themselves. You weren't interacting with them, you were sustaining them. They didn't see you as a person with needs, limits, or boundaries. They saw you as a resource, a lifeline, a one-way supply of strength they believed would never run out. But once you recognized the imbalance, you began to reclaim what was always yours: your energy, your clarity, your peace. Their dependence exposed their emptiness, but your awakening ended their access. They were spiritually bankrupt, but you're no longer their currency. Number 7, your absence isn't punishment, it's revelation. People often think that when you pull back, you're trying to hurt them, make a point, or teach them a lesson. But your absence was never about revenge. It was about clarity. When you stepped back, everything they worked so hard to hide became visible. The excuses, the manipulation, the dependence, the entitlement. Your presence used to blur those things. Your energy softened their rough edges. Your patience overlooked their selfishness, and your loyalty made their inconsistency look almost normal. But once you removed yourself, the truth had no shield. Without your effort covering their laziness, their character showed. Without your encouragement propping them up, their stagnation showed. Without your emotional availability, their emptiness showed. It became painfully obvious who brought what to the table, because now that you weren't there, everything collapsed the way it should have a long time ago. The interesting thing is how quickly the roles flip. The person who acted unbothered, uninterested, or detached suddenly becomes the one reaching out, panicking, or scrambling for access. The one who treated you like an option suddenly realizes you were the foundation. The one who acted like you were replaceable suddenly can't function without you. Your absence didn't punish them, it exposed them. They weren't losing you. They were losing the benefits of you, the support, the comfort, the guidance, the stability, the emotional security, all the things they took for granted. When those things disappear, they're forced to face their own inadequacy. And that's where the desperation comes from. Not love, not respect, desperation. They're not chasing the relationship, they're chasing the resources. And while they're scrambling, you're finally breathing. You're finally seeing what the relationship really was. Your distance reveals not only who they are, but who you've become. Stronger, clearer, more self-respecting. You didn't step back to cause pain. You stepped back because you outgrew the position they kept you in. Your absence is simply the mirror they avoided for too long. Now they can't unsee it. Number 8, the reason they targeted you wasn't weakness, it was accuracy. People often assume they're chosen for mistreatment because they're too soft or too naive, but that's not the real reason. The truth is sharper. They targeted you because they read you perfectly. They could see your compassion, your patience, your willingness to forgive, and your openness. They didn't stumble blindly. They didn't guess. They knew exactly who you were, and they calculated that you would tolerate more than most. They identified the places where your heart and your principles would make you reliable, steady, and accommodating, and they tried to exploit that accuracy. The mistake they made was assuming that generosity is limitless. They believed your patience had no expiration, that your empathy meant endless availability, that your loyalty was unconditional. They thought they had cracked the code of your spirit, that they understood the boundaries you hadn't clearly drawn yet. But they didn't anticipate the intelligence of self-preservation, the instinct to protect your energy, and the awakening that comes when someone realizes they are being measured and manipulated. The truth is, you didn't appear vulnerable because you lacked strength. You appeared accessible because you were whole enough to give without immediate return. And the moment they miscalculated your breaking point, everything changed. The same people who assumed control suddenly realized you weren't theirs to bend. The very traits they admired for convenience became the walls that shut them out. It's a powerful lesson in perception versus reality. They thought they were clever, but the cleverness belonged to you all along. They only saw what they could take, while you saw what they truly were. Opportunists mistaking your compassion for weakness. Their targeting wasn't a reflection of inferiority on your part. It was a reflection of their desperation and their inability to grow. You were never weak. You were precise, aware, and inevitable. They read you correctly, but they failed to calculate your limits. And once those limits were reached, you became untouchable, leaving them exposed and powerless. Number 9, you outgrew the manipulation because you finally saw the pattern, not the person. For the longest time, you kept giving people the benefit of the doubt because you were looking at them as individuals, someone having a bad day, someone going through something, someone who just needed a little grace. You kept treating their behavior as isolated incidents, personal quirks, or moments of weakness. But what looked like inconsistency was actually a consistent pattern. What looked like accidental hurt was rehearsed behavior. What looked like confusion was just control dressed in excuses. The shift happened when you finally stopped focusing on who they pretended to be and started paying attention to what they repeatedly did. That's when everything clicked. You didn't just see the person anymore. You saw the blueprint. You saw the cycle. You saw the predictable way they pulled back when you needed them, pushed forward when they needed something, apologized only when they feared losing access, and acted confused when you tried to hold them accountable. You realized their charm wasn't kindness, it was bait. Their vulnerability wasn't honesty, it was leverage. Their inconsistency wasn't stress, it was strategy. And once you recognized those patterns, the spell broke immediately. Manipulation only works when you're emotionally invested in the illusion. Once the illusion dissolves, so does their control. The moment you began to see the repetition, everything they did became transparent. Their excuses stopped sounding believable. Their demands stopped sounding urgent. Their tears stopped looking sincere. Their silence stopped feeling powerful. They were no longer this complicated, misunderstood figure. You could finally see them as someone who relied on confusion and chaos, to keep you guessing. And you didn't outgrow them with anger, you outgrew them with clarity. You stopped reacting, you stopped feeding the dynamic, you stopped explaining yourself to people who had no intention of understanding you. With every layer you peeled back, you regained a piece of your strength. Once the pattern became visible, their power evaporated. You walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally understood that caring for yourself meant stepping out of their design entirely. They didn't lose you, you escaped the cycle. Number 10, you didn't lose them. You closed the portal they were sneaking through. People love to say you lost someone when a relationship ends or when you stop giving certain people access to your life. But in your case, there was no loss. There was no heartbreak over someone slipping away. You didn't lose them. You closed the hidden entrance they had been using to access your time, energy, compassion, and stability without ever earning it. They treated your openness like a secret doorway, a back entrance they believed they had exclusive rights to. They didn't respect your boundaries because they assumed you wouldn't enforce them. They didn't value your presence because they believed you'd always be available. That wasn't connection. That was trespassing. And the entire time they were sneaking in under the radar, using your kindness as camouflage. Their goal was never to build with you. It was to benefit from you. They slipped into your life during vulnerable hours, during moments of softness, during times when your heart was still learning how to protect itself. They became accustomed to entering whenever they pleased, leaving whenever they wanted, and returning whenever their life needed fixing. And because you had a generous spirit, you didn't realize how much unauthorized access they were taking. The turning point came the moment you recognized the pattern, the moment you realized they weren't showing up to stay, they were showing up to siphon. They didn't contribute to your growth, but they depended on your strength. They didn't water anything in your life, yet they expected to pick fruit whenever they were hungry. Closing that portal wasn't an act of bitterness, it was an act of self-respect. You finally chose honesty over hope, clarity over confusion, boundaries over imbalance. You sealed off the space that once allowed them to slip in unchallenged, and suddenly the relationship wasn't as convenient for them anymore. That's why they disappeared, not because they were lost, but because access was denied. You didn't walk away from them, you walked back into yourself. They didn't exit your life, you revoked their pass. And once the portal closed, so did every illusion they used to keep you connected to something that never honored you. Number 11, they expected you to stay naive because your wisdom threatens their control. There are people who depend on your innocence more than your presence. They rely on you not noticing their contradictions, not questioning their motives, not calling out their patterns. They counted on you staying soft, confused, overly patient, and endlessly forgiving, because that version of you was easy to manage. As long as you kept explaining yourself, defending your intentions, and justifying your reactions, they felt secure. They believed they could keep shaping your perception, keep distracting you with apologies, and keep resetting the narrative every time you got too close to the truth. Your naivety wasn't a flaw. It was a comfort zone they exploited. You were honest, so you assumed others were too. You were loyal, so you assumed others had the same capacity. You were open-hearted, so you assumed transparency was mutual. But the more you grew, the more their strategies started to crumble. You began to hear the hesitation in their voice, notice the shifts in their stories, and feel the weight of interactions that once felt light. You weren't naive anymore. You were aware. And awareness is a threat to anyone who depends on confusion to maintain control. The quiet shift happened the day you stopped explaining yourself, when you stopped over-communicating, when you stopped defending your choices, when you stopped giving lengthy responses to people who gave you vague ones. That silence wasn't passive. It was powerful. It meant you finally trusted your instincts more than their excuses. It meant you no longer needed validation to make a decision. It meant you weren't afraid of walking away from what didn't match your growth. That's when they panicked. Not because they loved you, but because their influence expired. They couldn't redirect the narrative anymore. They couldn't guilt-trip you into staying. They couldn't manipulate your kindness because your wisdom exposed their intentions. Your evolution became the end of their control. And the moment they realized you were no longer playing the role they assigned you, the dynamic shifted permanently. You didn't become cold, you became conscious. And nothing terrifies a manipulator more than a conscious soul they can no longer mislead. Number 12. They never wanted a relationship with you. They wanted a reservoir. Some people never enter your life with the intention of giving, growing, or building something meaningful. They don't see you as a partner, a friend, or an equal. They see you as a reservoir, a constant source of energy, patience, and support they can tap into whenever it suits them. Your kindness becomes a utility, your strength a resource, and your presence a lifeline. They are not interested in investing in you, nurturing you, or meeting you halfway. They only want to take what they need and leave the rest untouched. Every conversation, every favor, every time you bent to help them was treated as a deposit into their personal bank of convenience. They didn't care about your feelings, your limits, or your boundaries. They only noticed when the taps were turned off. Their goal wasn't connection, it was extraction. They came with endless problems, insecurities, and shortcomings, and instead of addressing their own life, they leaned on yours. Your empathy became their escape route, your patience their safety net, your energy their fuel. And the most insidious part is that they make it look like a relationship. They laugh with you, cry with you, and sometimes even compliment you, making you think there's mutuality. But it's an illusion. Everything they give is calculated to keep you accessible, available, and emotionally invested. They never show up to give. They show up to drain, and they vanish the moment the reservoir runs low. The awakening comes when you finally see the pattern. You realize that you were never being valued as a person. You were being valued as a supply. And the truth hits. The people who depend on your energy without reciprocating have no loyalty, no investment, and no intention of genuine connection. They wanted a reservoir, not a relationship. The power shift happens when you stop supplying, when you stop bending to their needs, when you protect your energy and refuse to be the solution to problems that aren't yours to fix. That's when they realize that the reservoir has dried up and there's no coming back. You weren't abandoning them, you were reclaiming yourself. Number 13, your withdrawal didn't create distance. It exposed dependency. When you stepped back, it may have felt like you were creating space, like you were pulling away. But in reality, your withdrawal didn't build distance. It revealed the truth. It exposed exactly how much certain people relied on you, not because they valued you, but because they depended on you. They weren't used to managing their own emotions, solving their own problems, or carrying their own weight. And your presence had been the support system they didn't earn. When you finally stopped being available, the illusion of independence they projected shattered instantly. Your silence wasn't noticed as absence. It was noticed as failure. Suddenly they couldn't navigate life the way they had been accustomed to. They couldn't lean on you when things got uncomfortable. They couldn't rely on your patience to smooth over their mistakes. They couldn't manipulate their way through challenges by using your energy as a crutch. What they experienced wasn't loneliness, it was exposure. For the first time, they had to face themselves without the safety net of your presence. And the truth is brutal. They weren't scared of losing you. They were scared of losing the convenience of you. They weren't upset that you pulled back. They were terrified that they could no longer function without you. Their confidence, their composure, their sense of stability had always been borrowed, drawn from your willingness to give, forgive, and accommodate. Once that was gone, the cracks appeared, and their dependency was undeniable. Your withdrawal didn't punish them. It clarified everything. It separated the authentic from the opportunistic, the respectful from the exploitative, the reciprocal from the parasitic. It forced them to confront a reality they had been avoiding, that they had relied too much on someone who didn't owe them unlimited access. And in that exposure, you reclaimed yourself. You didn't distance yourself to create loss. You distanced yourself to reveal truth. Their dependency was laid bare, and your power finally was undeniable. Number 14, you're done being used because you finally chose alignment over attachment. There comes a point when you realize that giving endlessly to people who never reciprocate doesn't come from love. It comes from attachment. You held on to certain relationships, certain people, and certain dynamics, not because they nourished you, but because you were invested in the story you wanted them to be. You tried to fix what wasn't yours to fix, to rescue those who weren't ready, and to keep connections alive that were already draining you. But that approach always comes at a cost. It costs energy, peace, and the ability to grow without distraction. Choosing alignment over attachment means recognizing that not every connection deserves your presence. It means understanding that your time, your energy, and your spirit are valuable, and that they deserve reciprocity, respect, and growth. You stop staying in situations simply because you care about the person. They only remain if they match your frequency, your values, and your energy. Attachment keeps you trapped in cycles of giving without receiving. Alignment frees you to walk the path that truly honors you. Your new era began the moment you stopped being everyone's rescue mission. When you stopped solving problems that weren't yours, you reclaimed the power you had unknowingly lent away. You stopped covering for mistakes, excusing behavior, and filling voids that others were perfectly capable of confronting themselves. That choice didn't just change how others interacted with you, it changed how you interacted with yourself. And here's the profound truth. The people who once relied on your energy will feel your absence, but that absence isn't loss, it's consequence. Your alignment doesn't punish them. It simply exposes the imbalance. The boundaries you set, the energy you protect, and the clarity you embrace signal that you're no longer available to be used as a tool for someone else's growth or survival. Being done with being used isn't about anger, bitterness, or revenge. It's about claiming your space, honoring your energy, and stepping fully into the version of yourself that refuses to settle for less than what you deserve. Your era of alignment has begun, and nothing and no one can compromise it. Conclusion. The journey of the chosen ones isn't about enduring endless exploitation. It's about awakening to your own value. You weren't weak when people tried to use you. You were measured, studied, and observed. Every act of generosity, every ounce of patience, every boundary you didn't enforce was a mirror showing them what they could take. But with every observation, every test, every manipulation, you were learning too. You were learning where to stand, when to step back, and how to protect the energy that powers your purpose. You realized that your kindness was never a loophole. They were only exposing the blueprint of their own reliance on you. You weren't a backup plan, a resource to be drained, or a convenient option. You were the plan they couldn't respect, the energy they couldn't replicate, and the presence they couldn't control. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, stopped rescuing them, and stopped bending to their needs, the dynamic shifted. Their influence expired, their reliance became visible, and your freedom became undeniable. This is your season of alignment over attachment, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over approval. You're no longer available for exploitation. You've closed the portals they once snuck through, revealed their dependence, and reclaimed your energy, peace, and power. Your presence now belongs to those who respect it, and your growth is no longer negotiable. To all the chosen ones watching, this is more than a lesson. It's a declaration. You are done being used, done being measured, and done being the safety net for those who refuse to rise. Your value is undeniable, and your path forward is unstoppable. If this message resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment letting us know how you're stepping into your power today. Your energy is precious. Guard it, honor it, and never settle for less than you deserve. God bless you.